I'm Michael Bungay-Stenya. This is Change Signal. This is the podcast where we cut through the blather and the BS and the noise to find the good stuff that works in change. If you're a transformational leader seeking modern change mastery, this will be your favorite podcast. When Satya Nadella became CEO of Microsoft, he said, and this is a big decision, that they needed to move from a know-it-all culture to a learn-it-all culture. Because if you know it all, ironically, you find the past becoming an anchor, and you've traded off curiosity for certainty. And change, of course, is not about the past, it's about stepping into the future. Curiosity is one of the core attributes at the heart of creating change capacity. Dr. Kirstin Ferguson is a Thinkers 50 winner, a former Royal Australian Air Force officer, has sat on many organizations' boards, and her latest book is Blind Spotting: How to See What Others Miss. This is a delightful conversation. It's about humility and its need for a rebrand. It's about the power of the word yet, and it's about just what it takes to read the room. Kirstin, welcome.
Hello, it's wonderful to be here.
It's really nice to be talking to you. I know the book's newly out, and I mean, you tend to write on, broadly speaking, leadership. So tell me how leaders struggle in moments of change.
Well, what I think happens is leaders like to feel certain they have a path forward because, we feel we need to be able to communicate where we're going and bring people along with us. And that all, of course, is very valid. But in a lot of the time, we really don't know what the future holds. And the way the world is changing now and the rapid nature of change, what we thought we knew a year ago, a month ago, yesterday, is not necessarily relevant or needed. And you think back to when we started our careers, we accumulated knowledge around how to change things. We accumulated expertise, and it was like this big pile of books we carried along with us to each job.
Right.
Frankly, I don't know about you, but everything I learned back then is really like for the archives. It's not relevant anymore. So I think back to your question, one of the issues we have around change is thinking what's worked in the past will work again. And not recognizing that everything around us, the context and the pace that we're working at, and even the systems that we thought we could rely on, are no longer necessarily there or how we think they are there.
So what do leaders, and I'm thinking change leaders, but I'm thinking leaders in general, what do they need to unlearn?
Yeah, well, that's what I think. The most impactful leaders now are prepared to learn, then unlearn and pivot. And I know we all hate the word pivot, but it's a good word. I've been sharing that episode from Friends where David Schwimmer carries the sofa up the stairs and yells out, pivot, pivot. I mean, if anyone, just go onto YouTube and watch it. But it's a great...
I don't know much about Friends, but I actually know that episode,
But gosh, it's a good reminder. You can have a well-laid plan, and he did. He sketched out how he was going to get that sofa up the stairs, and of course it didn't work. And, it's a great message for anyone involved in change. That's what happens.
Yeah.
I think what people in change, or any of us, because we're all involved in change, you can be formal change leaders or informal. But there's three things I think we need to have, three different mindsets, and it's being honest and being curious and then being flexible. And I can flesh out what they look like. But we really need to be honest with ourselves that we don't necessarily know what's going to happen, or we don't even know the best way to proceed, but that's okay.
Yeah.
Actually being honest about that is going to help you get through this uncertain time.
So being honest, what am I being honest about? Because there's not many leaders who are going, well, look, I'm being dishonest.
Of course. So the idea of being honest is based on this theory of intellectual humility.
Right.
And intellectual humility is really being aware of the limits of your knowledge. Now, the reason I talk about honesty is it's really hard to say, I'm really being humble today. I'm really working on my humility, and how am I going there? And having a team sort of discussion about, you're really humble. There's so much baggage with the word. I just wanted to not confuse it with personal humility.
Yeah.
So this idea of being honest is looking in the mirror, if not to others, because, hopefully with others as well, and being okay with accepting the limits to how much you know. Being able to say 4 words, not 3, I don't know yet, and being
Right.
absolutely fine with that. So starting a change project saying, look, I don't know yet how we're actually going to achieve this, but I know that you've got the skills, I've got these skills, the other team have got these skills. Together, we're going to figure it out. So being honest is really being prepared to accept our intellectual limits, checking our ego, and hunting for those biases.
This is no small thing that Kirstin is suggesting. I mean, this is definitely work we just need to keep doing with ourselves, on ourselves as change leaders. How do I get to keep owning my own messy brilliance, the good, the bad, and the indifferent?
Now, that is the first step, though, and I'm sure we're going to talk about on its own, not particularly helpful. I mean, it is going to give you insight and some self-awareness. And sometimes it's starting small, on things that are somewhat inconsequential. And I should say at the outset, you have to be able to read the room. If you're leading in a crisis, for example, which I have done, there is no point standing there in the middle of the crisis and going, oh, look, I don't know yet, but we'll figure it out.
Yeah.
So we're talking now about the start of a change project or, regular sort of interactions we're having. My comment to someone if I was coaching them would be, do you know for sure how to do this? Let's just no one's listening here. Do you actually know? And the reality is most of us don't.
Yeah.
We don't know for sure how something's going to happen. Now, you don't sort of use a tone of, I don't know what we're going to do. I hope it all works out. This is a confident, I don't know right now, but I'm really confident we can figure it out. So my advice is to just practice. Try on something you're just not sure about with a team, on something that's somewhat small, and go, look, I don't know yet how we're going to figure this out. What do you think, Michael? What are your ideas?
Yeah.
Because then you've got a real coaching opportunity with the people you lead as well.
I love that. I mean, the yet is such a nice add to I don't know because it says, I am confident I will know. I just don't know yet. So there's a safety built into that phrase that people may not hear overtly, but they kind of will hear indirectly. The other connection I make, Kirstin, is, under the umbrella of honesty, we're talking about intellectual humility. And for me, I love that word humility. I know, as you said, it comes with baggage, but part of the root of that word is the same word that shows up in the word for ground, for humus. And I always think humility means you've got your feet on the ground, which means that you're sort of connected to a reality of what I do know, what I don't know, what I can do, what I can't do. And it feels like a stable position to be in.
I agree with you. And I would love to begin a campaign to rebrand humility. Even
humility.
The dictionary right now refers to the sort of religious background of humility, which is being lowly and meek.
Right, exactly.
And so it's got these real issues, and there's some organizations where if you went in that kind of way, that's the end of your career. So look, let's get some great advertising guru to come and rebrand humility, but it is a great word. It's a great concept.
You can connect with Kirstin, and note that's Kirstin with 2 I's, on LinkedIn and Instagram. And she's a great keynote speaker too. I've actually shared the stage with her a few times. So if you're in the market for that, KirstinFerguson.com is the place to go. KirstinFerguson.com, 2 I's for the Kirstin. So honesty is a first step, and it's necessary but not sufficient.
Yeah.
So where do we go from here?
Second step, we've got to be curious. Now, obviously, that's so obvious. Too many obviouses in there. But, of course, we're always asking people to be curious. So let me talk about what I mean about being curious.
Please.
The first thing is searching for the truth. And it blows my mind we now have contested truths these days, but there is an objective truth. And I think particularly for those in change, that is your bread and butter. You need to be looking for the data and the evidence. What is the actual truth of the situation, and what are your sources you're getting that information from, and that sort of thing.
Yeah.
We then need to pursue different perspectives. Now, again, you hear that all the time, but I can assure you, my experience sitting on boards, for example, we might want to do an acquisition. We pretend and tell ourselves, we've gone and asked different people and sought different advice, but really we've just asked people just like us, or people just in the organization. I mean, pursuing perspectives of someone who vehemently disagrees with what it is you're wanting to do. So if you're leading a change project and you know there's pockets of the organization or experts outside the organization that think this is a really bad idea, I would go and sit with them and start with, what am I missing? Like, what is it that you see that I don't see? Now, it doesn't mean you need to take it on board. It may be that they haven't got all the information or whatever, but you're at least opening your mind to different perspectives. And then lastly, it's about using questions, and it might be in those scenarios or in any situation where you're questioning for insight rather than to win.
Yeah.
So let me say that again, because we all do it. We question to learn rather than to prove our point, rather than to win.
Yeah.
We need to be genuinely interested in an answer that might be quite unlike that which we expect.
One thing that gets in the way of us hearing an answer that we're not expecting is the biases in our thinking. I mean, ever since Daniel Kahneman's Thinking Fast, Thinking Slow, we've all become increasingly aware of just how irrational we are, even if we have a brain that keeps persuading us that we're rational. So how do we get better at managing our biases? Because what I've read about it is, even if you know sunk cost fallacy or recency bias or primary bias, etc., we still fall for these biases all the time.
That's why feedback's so important, because even though we might not see our biases, they're painfully obvious to others. So they will see them. And that's why I'm such a proponent of, seeking feedback and creating feedback cultures where you can be giving and receiving feedback. And they're the only ways, really, in a lot of situations you're going to uncover your biases. And if you're someone who's being able to say and be honest, I don't have all the answers yet, then you're much more likely to have people be willing to come and say, well, here's an answer you might have missed, because of your thinking biases. But you're quite right. I mean, we fall for them constantly, all day, every day. And some of them are going to be more significant than others. But it doesn't mean they're not there. We're human. So unless you figure out a way to become an AI bot yourself, Michael, and they have biases.
Which to be
AI,
fair, exactly. That's true.
AI
That's
has
true.
biases and they're not even people. So, we, it's just part of one of our human, things we've got to live with. So it's more, I think, finding the workaround, and the workaround for me is feedback.
I think often in organizations, actually, it's harder to find people who are willing to express a contrary point of view, whether that's feedback or just, a different way of seeing the world. There's a way that it's like easier to get along, easier to go, no, it's fine. No, this will be good. How do you help people have the courage to argue with you, to have conflict with you even?
So one of the concepts we haven't sort of touched on is this idea of seekers and knowers, which I write about in the book. So everything we're talking about is an idea of someone who's seeking to learn more, to understand more, to question more, to unravel the truth. And they're prepared to go into situations not knowing the answers. Knowers, and we can both be we're all of these all the time. Knowers, we all know it, go into a situation, they know the answer and they're not prepared to change their mind and they're questioning to win. We want to develop teams of seekers. People, a whole culture, and in the book I write about the things we can do to be creating those cultures where that seeking mentality is really the DNA of the organization.
This is something I want to point to because Kirstin's giving us a big clue about building change capacity in our organizations. I mean, as change leaders, we're often called to, run the project, but increasingly it's about building the capacity. And I love this idea of curiosity, of seeking, as core DNA. Back to Kirstin.
And I open and close the book with the story of NVIDIA, the AI company, but from how they began 30 years ago. And they've had the value of intellectual honesty their entire 30 odd years because they create these teams of seekers.
Right.
So they do have a culture where they focus on having people who will disagree.
Yeah.
And this isn't, in an adversarial way, obviously. If we think of scientists, they're a perfect example where their whole raison d'etre is saying, I have a hypothesis, but it could be wrong. So let's test it. And so your colleagues are constantly, they're saying, I don't think it's going to work for these reasons. We really, want to have that sort of interactions in our teams. And so that when you've got a strategy for change or you're developing a strategy, when someone speaks up and says, I think there's a huge hole here we haven't thought of, you as the leader goes, thank you, Michael. I'm like, oh gosh, I had not seen that.
Yeah.
I did not see that. None of us saw that. Tell us more. This is fantastic. And you will start to get obviously a lot more contributions like that where you have a psychologically safe workplace.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, as you talk about NVIDIA, I'm thinking of other companies who I think have something like this. Pixar is very famous for their their piece. BlackRock is also famous for a kind of slightly brutal, but it's like your job is to speak truth to power.
Yeah.
But it works for them. But I think I read recently, in Pixar, they had to refine the process of sitting in the room and getting notes from everybody because it just felt a little bit relentless.
Yes.
How do you find that balance between honesty, humility, openness, seeking, and not in the end getting your sense of self being crushed?
Yeah, I'll talk to leaders about needing to calibrate, what they're doing. And so we need to be reading the room. If you're noticing that you've got so many seekers, and I wouldn't actually even call them seeking if they're just constantly picking holes in stories, that's not helpful either. We really need to be moving forward. We can't just go around in circles and find holes in things. And so I think if you notice that that's happening, again, it's being honest. And I would, as a leader, go, hey, I've noticed that what we're doing now is we're all just picking holes in everything. This isn't sort of how this works. So what we need to do is mutually and respectfully, if there's something that we notice, let's call it out. But we're not only seeking flaws. We're not flaw seekers. We're seekers of truth and what is going to help us move forward.
That's helpful. We've got honesty, we've got curiosity. There's a third step.
There is.
Set that up for us.
So, okay, we've been honest with ourselves and others. We've now gone and found perhaps a whole different truth we hadn't thought about, or we've gone and got a different perspective that's caused us to now question whether what we thought was true. The third step is to be flexible. So it's no good, all of that happening, and then we're not prepared to do anything with this information. So the way we can do that is, A, reading the room. So figuring out, are we in a position now where we need to adjust, and can I adjust, and how easily can we do that? And, the idea of reading the room for me is so important because if you're a knower and you think you know everything, you're in a very small room. You want to be making sure you're in as big a room as possible. We need to embrace ambiguity. And then finally, it's really about keeping our mind open and being prepared to change it. And again, as I said earlier, it's not about flip-flopping. It's not about being someone who doesn't have an opinion, but it is being prepared to say, actually, I've just learned I didn't have all the information, or I had a massive bias going on in my thinking. I've got to change my mind. And saying to my team, this is what I missed. Thanks to you guys. I'm really glad you pointed out ABC. I really missed that. So this is, what I'm suggesting we now do, and changing that way forward. Now, these 3 steps are not linear and they're not binary. Like I'm not going, okay, now I'm being honest, and now today I'll be curious, and now I'll be flexible. this can all be happening sort of simultaneously. And it's more making sure that we're really not just being honest and then walking away because, that's unhelpful. It's
Right.
being really curious and understanding we've then got to have that willingness to be flexible as well.
Reading the room is interesting, Kirstin, because there's two challenges that I see. One is you're less reading the room, but just projecting your own biases onto it. You're like, this is how I'm feeling, so I'm just going to assume that that's the room that I'm reading. The second is reading the room might mean you confirming or amplifying what's happening as opposed to disrupting it. Because one of the things you might say as a leader is like, look, my job is actually to stir this up because we're in a state I've got to do something differently rather than confirming it. How do you increase your capacity to better have a nuanced reading of a room and understand what's really needed?
Yeah, and I've got so much to say, so I'm going to narrow that down. This particular practice has really borne out from my last book, which is the companion to Blind Spotting called Head and Heart, The Art of Modern Leadership, where reading the room, or I called it perspective as an attribute, was one of the key attributes of modern leaders.
Right.
And there's a Head and Heart leader scale, which is something like 33,000 people have done. And we keep analysing the data, and it came out as having the most special qualities. If you scored high or self-assessed high in perspective or reading the room, you're most likely to score high in all the other attributes.
Okay.
It's an incredibly important skill. But for reading the room, it is picking up on those signals and this idea of calibrating what is needed in the context in which you're in.
Right.
You're quite right that our own thinking biases end up creating very small rooms because we're convinced we're right, and we go and find other people who think we're right. And in our room, everything's jolly. It's great. We're all right. Everyone's right. But obviously, as soon as that room opens off into the real world, we can soon discover that we weren't so right at all.
Yeah.
And so I think, clearly I'm not talking about a literal room. This is your team or your organization or your industry. What I think we can be doing to enlarge our room, and really that's what I think we all need to be doing, is letting into the room those people who have a different perspective.
Yeah.
Noticing who's missing from the room. Noticing who's in the room but not saying anything. This is how we calibrate how we're reading the room and the signals that we're picking up on, and going and looking at what's happening in other industries, going outside your whole auditorium, let alone a room, and going and seeing what others are doing. So I think reading the room, it's such a hard one to define if you're neurotypical and it comes somewhat intuitively.
Right.
It is a skill that I know from my research is absolutely imperative for us in a very fast-moving world.
I want to touch on ambiguity. We talked about it at the start. You've touched on it a few times. It's such a truth about what it means to be in change, which is if you're honest about things, you're like, it's a lot of this is ambiguous, in part because change is typically not a linear experience. It's an emergent experience where stuff happens and then some other stuff shows up which nobody was quite expecting. Are there any islands of certainty, or are we all just doomed to kind of paddle in a lake of ambiguity for the rest of our working lives?
I do think that life is ambiguous. I don't know what tomorrow holds. I don't know what this afternoon. I don't even know what I'm having for breakfast, Michael. So, life is ambiguous. But I think the more we are able to embrace that, the more freeing it is to be able to have that blue sky thinking about what might follow. I guess it's reframing it, because ambiguity for some people is this, fear of the not knowing. Whereas I like to think of it is that's a certainty. One certainty is I don't know. And
Yeah.
so well, that's what we're working with. So how are we just going to navigate through that? Because that is what it is. I mean, it's hardwired into us as humans to want certainty from when we were cave people, needing certainty around finding food and all of that sort of thing.
Yeah.
And I understand why it's so important to us. And certainly, in the world today, when we look at geopolitical changes and economic changes, it is scary.
Yeah.
And when we went through COVID, that was a great example of ambiguity, particularly at the beginning, where we all had no idea how this was going to pan out and, what was going to happen to us. But we survived and we navigated it and we created a new sense of certainty within that ambiguity. So I think it's definitely linked to having a growth mindset. If you're someone who's always learning and you haven't got fixed knowledge and that you're always going to be changing, then it's much easier to deal with ambiguity. That's for sure.
What guidance or coaching or advice would you give a change leader now that you wouldn't have given them 5 years ago? How's your thinking or your wisdom on that shifted?
I think that the most sought after change leaders will be those who start the brief with a sense of having no idea how to do it. And I say that with every respect in the moment, because if you're a change leader who learnt about change 20 years ago or 10 years ago and has your toolbox of doing things, I don't know that you're that relevant in 2025.
Strong words.
If you haven't unlearnt some of that stuff. I know it's strong words, but it's exciting stuff as well, because it frees you up to be able to go in. You've got that expertise, but file it in the back of your mind and go in with an open mind and say, this is change I've never seen before that's needed. How are we going to do it? I don't know yet, but gosh, it's exciting. So that's my challenge to change people.
That's great.
Is to not feel imprisoned by the expertise you've acquired over so many years.
Look, I know you are a transformational leader who is seeking modern change mastery. And of course, that's what this podcast is all about. There's a deep and paradoxical truth at the heart of this podcast, that modern change mastery is often about unlearning and letting go of current expertise. It's a way of acknowledging blind spots, and you're best able to meet this current moment with grace and elegance and skill. Thank you for supporting the podcast by listening to it, and thank you for supporting it by spreading the word. That is how we grow best. So a review is always appreciated, but a greater gift still is a recommendation to a fellow transformational leader like you, or more widely, by posting on LinkedIn. And if you do post there, make sure you tag me. Thanks for doing the work. I'm glad you're here.